People look at you today, 20 years later, and they still have no idea what you're about. Tell me in a sentence who you are.
Nobody. I'm nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. And a straight razor if you get too close to me.
In response to the question of who are you, infamous cult leader of the late 1960s, Charles Manson's response may be bewildering at first glance, but upon a closer examination, it provides us an interesting insight into the significance of one's own identity. Upon being asked the question, "Who are you?" Manson's first instinct is to respond with a variety of emoji-like facial expressions, ranging over the entire emotional spectrum in quick succession: anger, surprise, amusement, confusion, glee, shock, happiness, and ultimately indifference. He then follows this odd display with a verbal response to the reporter's question, stating that he is nobody. He continues, explaining that he's a tramp, a bum, a hobo, a boxcar, and a jug of wine, and a straight razor if you get too close. At first viewing, one would be inclined to conclude that these were nothing but the mere ramblings of a deranged madman. But what if I told you that upon a deeper analysis into what exactly Manson meant, we may be able to gather an interesting insight into this question of identity, or lack thereof. One interpretation is that Manson considered himself quote-unquote a nobody in the adjective form to describe himself as an outcast or someone living on the outskirts of society, like a bum or a hobo, a person of no significant importance to the outer society. While this may be true, I also believe Manson had considered himself to be the pronoun nobody, as in identifying as not any person, non-human. By identifying himself as a boxcar, a jug of wine, and as a straight razor, he effectively depersonifies himself, as if to say he's not a human person, identifying more closely with inanimate objects. Perhaps it's because he has been ostracized from society, or has ostracized himself through his actions. Now, in the bowels of a prison cell, he has effectively been detached from society, or any semblance of humanity, and thus relates more closely with the inanimate and other non-human entities. Not only is he a dreg of society, but he can also be the scenery in which they are found, the drink that they consume, and a weapon or a tool for violence, like a straight razor. But what stood out to me most was Manson's facial emotional exhibition. When Manson was asked who he was, for some reason he first chose to respond with an expression of the entire human emotional lexicon at once, reminiscent of an android malfunctioning, another non-human entity. Whether they were faked or not, he has learned these emotions and can produce them at will, given the proper inputs, as if he were a computer program. This was no doubt a method he used to mimic and manipulate those around him. But what was Manson's purpose behind doing this? It stands to reason that one cannot be both happy and not happy or sad simultaneously. One cannot be both angry and calm at the same time. As per the law of non-contradiction, it's either one or the other. By expressing every emotion virtually simultaneously, perhaps he is actually trying to convey that he is no emotion at all. In other words, because he is every emotion, he is no emotion. Because he is everything and everybody, therefore, he is nobody. Essentially, he can wear any mask he needs to wear. He can take on any identity. He is every emotion there is to be. Because his personality is empty, he can play any role he needs to play. He can be any person he needs to be. Whether it be the role of the charismatic cult leader, that of the social outcast hobo, the inanimate object that is overlooked in the background, the tool that is used to commit atrocities, or even the madman lunatic who is raving lunacy in front of your very screen. He is nothing, and therefore he can be anything. Just as Franz Bonaparte once said, humans can be anything they want to be. And perhaps a prerequisite for this is to first become nothing at all. To become nobody. And this is where the one known as Johan comes in. The question of identity, who are you, is a question of ever-rising significance in modern society, and one that all of us will eventually grapple with. It is a question no one can escape, and is often at the center of our lives. Naoki Urasawa's anime titled Monster thoroughly explores this question of identity, or lack thereof, through the narrative of the character known as Johan, who comes to embody the ultimate form of nihilism. Harken back to Charles Manson's answer to the question of who are you, and our subsequent analysis as a precursor to understanding the complete nihilistic identity of the one who is called Johan. Identity, as defined by the Dictionary of Psychology, is an individual's sense of self, demarcated by a set of physical, psychological, and interpersonal characteristics that is not wholly shared with any other person. It is also related to a range of affiliations, for example, ethnicity and various other social classifications. Now take a second and ponder about what is definitively known about the identity of this character known as Johan. Physically, he is characterized as an attractive white male, blonde with blue eyes in his early to mid-20s. However, these physical traits are not unique, and they are shared with that of his twin sister. In fact, they look so similar such that Johan can put on a wig and women's clothing and become a carbon copy of his sister. He can even seamlessly imitate her voice, personality, mannerisms, and quirks. This is done by design to demonstrate the lack of a physical identity that is unique to this character. As is common practice in storytelling, oftentimes characters have internal monologues to illustrate their psychological state. However, Johan doesn't have a single internal monologue within the entire anime. A view into his psychological state from his perspective is purposely omitted from the narrative in order to continue the lack of any discernible psychological self-identification. Any identifiers of the psychological state of Johan are narrated by other characters upon an outside analysis of his actions, demeanor, and potential motive. Most notably, his criminal interactions with other characters as conveyed through the analysis and interviews of the crime psychologist Dr. Gillen. The interpersonal aspects that contribute to our society are based in our relationships with others and the world around us. Inter meaning from person to person. This can include one's occupation, how one interacts with others, whether they are extroverted or standoffish, selfish or altruistic in their dealings. But what can be said of Johan's relationship with others? To everyone he encounters, he is someone different, representing something different to them, and something that often conflicts with itself. Like a squared circle, he's seemingly a walking contradiction in terms, a self-contradiction of absurdity. For example, to the neo-Nazis, he is a charismatic leader who was born to lead them into regaining their former glory. But he is also the same man who ultimately neutralizes their movement. To Carl Newman, he is a friend with whom he can confide in, someone who can relate and who can empathize with Carl and his feelings of abandonment, but who, at the same time, simply uses Carl as a pawn to further his own plans of manipulation, and ultimately abandons him as well. To Mr. Schuwald, he's a trusted handler, a surrogate son figure, and yet simultaneously, he is the man who tries to take control of his estate and kill him. To Detective Lunge, he is someone who doesn't even exist, a mere figment of Dr. Tenma's imagination, until the moment comes where he must come face to face with the idea that Johan is in fact very real. That the only thing he could trust, his intuition, was wrong. A realization that shakes him to his very core and causes him to reevaluate every relationship in his own life. But perhaps it's from Johan's most important relationships where we can garner the most insight into who exactly Johan is. And that is through the relationships with none other than his family. Dr. Tenma, his surrogate father, his twin sister Anna, and of course, his own mother. To Tenma, he was a boy for whom he was willing to risk his career, his life's work over, by saving his life. In the face of mounting pressure from his superiors to give operating priority to the rich and famous over the poor, unnotable, and destitute, Johan was someone that allowed Dr. Tenma to ground his ethics in. It's children who are most vulnerable in society, and Johan was someone who represented this vulnerability. He was someone who had reminded Tenma of what it really meant to be a doctor, that his years of study and practice weren't for nothing, that the morals he had based his life and career on weren't all just a lie. By saving this boy, he was also saving himself. But at the same time, Johan would be the person who would take all of this away. He both saved Tenma and brought him to the brink of destruction. An angel and a demon. To his sister, at the start of the series, despite being the single person who knows Johan the most, much of who Johan is clouded to her, in a shroud of amnesia caused by intense trauma, embodying both the pinnacle of ignorance and knowledge. It can be said that Anna is in the position most similar to the viewer. Like the viewer, she begins in complete ignorance of who exactly Johan is. Just like her, we embark on a journey to find out who Johan is. And in turn, just like Anna, through this journey, we will also manage to gain an insight into who we are. And finally, Johan's own mother, perhaps the only person in the world who was supposed to love him unconditionally, but whose love seemingly did not extend as far as it should have. An unloving mother. She did not want anyone to know she had 2 children, and so she would dress Johan up in the same clothes as his sister in order to protect him. However, when the moment came to protect her children, she was unable to, and instead protected herself. While there is much that we don't know about Johan, there are some things that we do know. Johan was a product of a eugenics experiment. His existence was meticulously planned out. His parents, specifically chosen as a pairing due to their upbringing, careers, IQ, and phenotypic traits. Even their personalities were accounted for and deduced to be a suitable match. Thus, from his phenotypic appearance to his high IQ, as if he were a programmed machine, no detail was left to chance. Simply by virtue of being a product of a greater scheme in the manner of a scientific experiment, it can be said that one's own perception of self-autonomy is challenged. An air of genetic determinism would inevitably appear and cloud one's own perceptions of self and self-determination. In other words, how much of who I am is really my own authentic choosing, and how much a product of who I was programmed to be by the external factors of this controlled experiment. Are Johan's personality traits, preferences, tendencies, and ultimately actions doomed to be products of the machinations of a eugenics experiment? Is his life simply a game code? Press this button and this will happen, as if he were a machine used to fulfill the sick political desires or indulge in the curiosities of a group of conspirators. A question central to one's identity is the question of why I was born into this world, and for what purpose does this birth serve? Undoubtedly, a question that Johan has racked his brain trying to answer. Johan was not born out of love. Love defined as a free and unconditional choice to sacrifice self for the sake of another. Love being something that will play a critical role in painting the picture of who Johan is. He was not born because he was particularly wanted for who he was or who he would choose to become, but rather he was born for the same reasons that a lab rat might be born. And he is only one lab rat of many whose purpose, destiny, and decisions had already been decided for them. Born to carry out the fruits of an experiment, or casually tossed aside if such outcomes were deemed unpreferable. There's no free will there. There's no love there. Johan must have understood just what a capricious and meaningless existence this truly was. But he would also come to the conclusion that he is not alone in this. In fact, all of society shares in this hollow, meaningless existence, for there is in fact no love or purpose to be found anywhere in this world. Johan was also born without ever knowing his own father, as his life was taken for attempting to break free from the project after he had genuinely fallen in love with his lab partner. And this is where the idea of love first enters into Johan's history. It's because of love that Johan did not have a father. Perhaps it had crossed Johan's mind once. What could drive a man to risk his life in this manner? What is this love that has left me fatherless? The second time love enters into Johan's history is at birth. Perhaps the first act of love that a parent shows to his child is none other than granting that child a name. There is power in a name. There is love in a name. A name imbues individuality. Animals in nature don't have their own names. It's something exclusive to the human experience, illustrating the idea that everyone is unique. Everyone has something to contribute, everyone has value, and everyone is their own person. The first act of love from parent to child conveys that they are valued, and that they have something different and something of value to contribute to the larger society, something that only they can contribute. Moreover, the surname reflects a legacy, a history that despite being your own person with your own unique first name, you also come from a long lineage of ancestors, that you're a part of something much greater that extends far beyond yourself and your own existence. And along with that comes the pressure to continue that lineage, that history, and to elevate your name to even grander heights, to make others proud, and the chance to bring honor to the family name. The surname contributes to the conception of the human ego. For the twins, no such love was displayed to them. No names were given to them. As Franz Bonaparte has stated, they have no such need of names. Thus, there was no obvious confirmation of a uniqueness or an individuality. There was no apparent expression of an overt applied value. There was no difference than that of the other nameless animals in nature. And in nature, there is no right or wrong. There is only survival of the fittest. Moreover, a name defers possession. I am giving you this name. You're my child. You belong to this family name or this house. For Johan, this notion of possession was absent, or perhaps better put, without a name, there was no sense of belonging. No sense of belonging to a family unit, to a family legacy, to a larger community, and ultimately, no sense of belonging to the larger world. Thus, without a name, the seeds of nihilism are sown. Just as he did not belong to any family, with a mother, father, grandfather, it will come to follow that he feels he does not belong to the family of the greater human society. A lack of connection or community in the microcosm of the nuclear family transforms into the macrocosm of the community at large. In summation, we observe the seeds of Johan's ultimate nihilism planted even before his birth. Being the product of a eugenics project served to facilitate a persona devoid of identity, a lack of confidence in self-determination, a lack of an individuality unique to humanity through a name, a lack of connection to a family history, to a stable family unit, or to a community, and ultimately a lack of purpose, facilitated by a birth without reason. But perhaps the moment in which Johan's nihilism was truly solidified is the day his mother was forced to choose between him and his sister. Truly a blood-curdling experience that no parent would ever want to find themselves in, having to choose to save one child and offer the other into an unknown abyss. It was at this moment that Johan knew life was ultimately meaningless, that life had no ultimate value. As a result of Johan and his sister dressing in the same clothes to give the impression that their mother had only one child, at this moment his mother was unsure of who was who, or was she? The truth is unknown. That truth doesn't exist. The only truth that existed at that moment was the dilemma of choosing which child she would have to surrender or suffer the consequences. And in that split second, a decision was made. But was choosing to surrender Johan's sister an arbitrary decision? No, it couldn't have been. There was a slight hesitation prior to the decision, and in that hesitation, something far worse was illustrated. Worse than the capricious nature of an arbitrary decision to sacrifice one of your own children. Something like a random choice could be left up to an external, impersonal force like fate, but this hesitation proved that that choice wasn't arbitrary, that it wasn't impersonal, that Johan's mother was making an active mental calculation. But what could she have possibly been calculating short of the value of 2 lives, weighing each life on a scale, Anna or Johan? Which child was more valuable? Which one could she give up? Which one did she love more? Did she truly wish to save Johan, or did she confuse him with his sister? Did she actually want to save Anna instead? And as Johan said, which one of us was unneeded? But in the end, her calculations did not serve her intended purposes. She didn't save anyone, as both the twins managed to survive and to suffer onward despite her decision. Neither of the twins would be saved or spared from the trauma of the Red Rose Mansion, from the trauma of being unwanted. Because of this fact, Johan realized that all of her moral calculations were futile, and ultimately the efforts and calculations of all humans to do the right thing based on potential outcomes and calculations of these outcomes are all ultimately meaningless. So-called decisions between right and wrong are ultimately illusory. Furthermore, it was at this moment that Johan also realized that there was no love in this world. A mother's love, supposedly unconditional, self-sacrificial, and equal for all her children, was not extended equally to her children. Someone like Tenma would have rather died than given up one of his own children. Johan's mother did not display true love. True love is a sacrifice, a preference of others over oneself. What a horrifying realization for a child to comprehend, and most children won't. But Johan was different. At a young age, Johan had realized a dark truth, that all life isn't equal. For not even the lives of 2 genetically identical twins were equal in value. If need be, one would always be chosen over the other, even by their own mother. In fact, the only thing all people are equal in is in death. For even the rich man and the poor man, the strong man and the weak man, the smart man and the dumb man will put their own interest in self-preservation above all else and still ultimately meet the same fate, regardless of their choices. To view all life as equal in dignity and to go against your natural urge of self-preservation to protect it, that is love. A love that Johan did not know, but a love that he always wanted. Johan had never experienced this love until the day he was saved by Dr. Tenma, the man who was willing to sacrifice everything from his prestigious career, his future, his marriage, to save the life of one random boy. Tenma was willing to lose it all out of love. Flash forward several decades, and the central question remains: who is Johan? The experiences at the Red Rose Garden could have happened to him. No, in fact, they did happen to him. Because he is nobody, he is his sister, and he adopts his sister's memories and experiences as his own. In the same vein as a lack of a unique individuality, even Johan's own memories are not his own. Johan understands that he's a living contradiction. He kills without motive, without purpose, without rhyme or reason. Detectives confirm that the one thing that all his crime scenes have in common is that they are highly impersonal, mechanical in their efficiency, and that they lack any sort of passion or reason, any sort of ego or identity. To Johan, what we call life is ultimately meaningless. Therefore, taking a life is as routine as throwing out a piece of garbage. When Johan confronts Dr. Tenma as an adult and is presented with the question of why he kills, his answer is chilling. He simply answers, "Why not?" A response that shakes Tenma to the very core of his being. A man whose very life had revolved around preserving life. A career in medicine presupposing the unquantifiable value of life, of how precious it is. But perhaps what set Tenma over the edge was how he almost lost everything to stay true to this belief. This belief manifested through saving the life of an orphan boy. And now, the very same person for whom he almost lost everything for is laughing in the very face of this notion, taking the lives of others for no reason, right in front of Tenma's very eyes, as if to reveal how absurd human conceptions of the value of a human life and the notions of right and wrong truly are, just as Johan's mother's calculations were. Tenma's ethical disposition is questioned and inverted. The machinations of consequentialism that had created the monster in front of him, the moral reasoning behind saving this boy, and the implications of what saving his life now means. The battle between upholding the idea that all life is equal inherently, and the moral calculation that perhaps Tenma shouldn't have saved that boy who has now taken countless lives, paralyzes Tenma both physically and emotionally. Tenma now begins to question himself. Because Tenma saved Johan, is he now responsible for the deaths of all of Johan's victims? What if he hadn't saved that boy? But saving him was the right thing to do, wasn't it? Tenma now serves as a stand-in for the viewer who may hold utilitarian dispositions and now must find themselves grappling with this moral dilemma. But for Johan, this test is deliberate. He had only experienced love from Tenma, and it's for that very reason that he must crush this love, and in doing so validate his own conclusions of the world, and validate his own identity in nihilism. Throughout Johan's life, all the people in his life were trying to use him for their own purposes. Born into this world as a product of the goals of other people's scientific experimentations, whisked away from orphanage to orphanage, from family to family, like a feather moving to the bends of the winds of fate. He was either pedestalized or left for dead, with no choice in the matter. Never seen or treated as human, as an end in and of himself, always viewed as a tool, as something to be used by another, and never truly loved. But Tenma did show this love to Johan. He did treat him as an equal, not as a tool to be used or as a superior, but as an equal, without preference. If Johan can cause this Tenma, the man who saved his life, to be the same man to take his life, then Johan will have succeeded in proving that Tenma is no different than he is, or any other human in this world. that even the best that humanity has to offer, a selfless doctor, can be the same as the worst humanity has to offer in a mass murderer. That it wasn't my fault for the monster I have become. Now Tenma too will be manipulated and programmed just as I was. He will serve as a proxy for humanity, who will come to understand that even Tenma too can kill and become a monster. Know that anyone can become a monster as long as the proper buttons are pushed. Just as Johan is a robot of the programming of fate, so too is every human. Robots who can be manipulated and molded into whatever Johan wants them to be, given the appropriate stimuli. Again emerges the concept that humans can become whatever they want to be. Thus, throughout the course of the narrative, invariably Johan seeks to subvert morality itself, seeking to constantly demonstrate that ultimately there is no right or wrong, only the human instinct for its own survival. Is all life truly equal? Or when it comes down to it, won't you place your own life above all else? In that moment of life and death, what prevails is the instinct for one's own survival. Fear and death is the great equalizer of men. As Johan has no name, identity, or ego, he acts as a perfect mirror, reflecting the dark nature of humanity onto itself. He only reflected Detective Braun's lies back onto himself, conveying to him a dark truth, a reality that he so desperately didn't want to accept. A truth that, when exposed, plunged him into the depths of hopelessness and prompted his suicide. Like a light, Johan exposes the truth hidden in the darkness. He did not coerce anyone. Those who killed for him were other disaffected, disillusioned, alienated and maladapted peoples. Humans that society had forgotten and left behind. Humans who we unknowingly walk by every day on the street. Humans with traumatic pasts. Humans who were never truly loved. And humans who only needed a slight nudge into the depths of indifference, meaninglessness, and nihilism to act out their most inner depraved and repressed desires and realities. Johan is someone who believes they have the entire world figured out. From his days at Kinderheim to operating a multinational business enterprise, all while orchestrating murders across Germany, he's always had it all figured out. The life humans value so much, ethical notions of right and wrong, conventions and ideals of so-called love and forgiveness, he concludes these values are non-existent, meaningless, and absurd. The culmination of nihilism in the absurdity of life is suicide. Suicide is the antithesis of self, of love for oneself, for others, and for the world. It's the antithesis of connection and the logical conclusion of indifference and nihilism. Because life is ultimately meaningless, the ultimate question is, why not simply commit suicide? And thus, Johan's ultimate plan is to commit the perfect suicide. That is, not only taking his own life, but removing all memory of his very existence from this world, such that it would be as if he were never even born. Johan has deemed it preferable to have never even been born, to never have even existed, than it is to continue living. For Johan, suicide is also a chance to take his destiny into his own hands. As the product of a now defunct eugenics experiment, he is the culmination of causality without a purpose. As after the experiment was called off, the purpose of the experiment was also nullified. Through suicide, Johan would finally be breaking free from the emptiness of an externally imposed, meaningless destiny. Ultimately, Johan wants to commit suicide by murder at the hands of the man who had once saved his life, to prove the absurdity of morality, the meaninglessness of life, the unequal nature of life, but also to turn Tenma into a monster so that there would finally be someone who could understand him. Tenma would become the new monster. But Johan's ultimate suicide was not a new plan that Johan had concocted, but rather it was a return to a previous state. To this point, Johan is a nameless monster, on a rampage devouring everyone who stands in his way. But as his memories returned, Johan had realized that he wasn't always the nameless monster. That the monster wasn't always within him, but it had consumed him from the outside and stolen his true name. The moment in the library where Johan reads the Nameless Monster picture book, the same book he was holding as a child in the Three Frogs Inn, sets Johan on a new path of uncovering his past, which prompts him to haphazardly relinquish his plans of taking over the Schubald estate and to return to his hometown and reinvestigate his roots at the Red Rose Mansion and the Three Frogs Inn, and to find the original monster in Bonaparte. And once his memory had returned, so too did his goal for the ultimate suicide return. Because it turns out, from the day Anna had returned from the Red Rose Mansion and recounted her story of unimaginable horror, Johan had taken a vow to protect his sister from those very men, but in his own twisted and misguided way. As a result of this vow, he would kill all of their adoptive parents once their past was beginning to be uncovered, so that Franz Bonaparte and those evil men would never be able to find Anna again. This culminated in the murder of the Lieberts, but this time Anna had discovered him in the act. She had uncovered the truth that Johan had been the one behind the murders of their caretakers over the years, and at that moment, she shot Johan right where he was pointing, dead in the center of his head. There was no forgiveness. Perhaps at that moment, Johan wanted to be discovered by Anna. He wanted to die so that the memories of their past would also die along with him. Perhaps Johan believed that as long as he existed, the experiment would never end. Those men would always be after them, and Anna would never be safe. He believed that it was through his death that Anna would finally be allowed to live freely, to form a new identity for herself. Johan sought to sacrifice himself for the sake of Anna, just as Tenma will do for him. It could be said that Johan loved Anna. But when Johan was brought back from the dead by Dr. Tenma and awoke to see his dear sister, the only person in the world for which he had a semblance of love for, she completely rejected this love, deeming him to be a monster. But even so, a monster can still love and want to be loved. It's not that Johan is clever, cunning, or manipulative, or a monster that is frightening, but rather, it's that he's human that is the most frightening. It's the idea that despite committing such inhumane acts, he is still very much every bit as human as you and I. And as a result of this humanity, he has a deep desire to love and to be loved. Essentially, I believe that this is the true nature of Johan. Behind the nihilism, Johan wants to be loved. He didn't want to be a genetically superior marvel, a product of a eugenics operation to create a future world leader. He didn't want any special treatment, or to be used or tossed aside. He simply wanted his mother to love him, to sacrifice herself in defense of her child like a loving mother should. He wanted his sister to forgive him for failing to protect her from those evil men who took her away that day. He wanted to have a place to belong to, a family, a country, a home, somewhere he was safe, surrounded by those who love him, and people he can love in return. He wanted a name. He wanted to be someone. As Franz Bonaparte says, and is a common theme in the narrative, people can become anything they want to be. Truly, people can be anything they want to be, for bad and for good. Perhaps Franz himself had realized this truth upon falling in love with Johan's mother. In that moment, in that experience of love, something inside of him had also changed. Indeed, love is the most powerful force in the world, and it has the ability to radically change people's hearts. After Franz ended the experiment and killed all of those who orchestrated it, he imparted these words onto Nina. People can become anything they want to be, and you two are both beautiful jewels. That's why you can't become monsters. Perhaps Franz wanted to let the monster die with him in one final act of monstrosity, of mass murder, for the outcome of saving these two little children, these two little jewels. But once again, as with Johan's mother, Tenma, and all the other humans, Franz's consequentialism could never truly contend with the myriad of unforeseen outcomes put into motion by his one action. Despite his efforts to mitigate the damage that he had caused, it was ultimately futile. Because his final words to Anna had only been partially conveyed to Johan. Only the partial truth of how one's identity could be stripped and molded into anything was relayed through the trauma of Nina and imparted onto Johan. The complete truth that conveyed the true, valuable nature of their lives, akin to precious jewels, and the truth that they didn't have to become products of their environment, was omitted until the stormy night where they would all be reunited again. And on that night, it's through love that Nina was able to forgive Johan in a way she could not all those years ago. And just as love had changed Bonaparte's heart, the love he showed Nina had spared her from becoming another monster. And in the end, the love Tenma shared with Johan would prevail. For Tenma was not able to pull that trigger and to kill Johan, despite the horrible things Johan had done, despite it being the right thing to do. In the end, Tenma saved Johan's life once again, representing the ultimate forgiveness and illustrating that love will continue to endure and triumph over fear, nihilism, and indifference. Johan received a crushing defeat from all angles. He realized that he was wrong, that forgiveness and love do exist. Throughout the course of the narrative, only one part of Franz's quote is repeated, that humans could be anything they want to be. We, as the viewer, relayed this into meaning that human identity can be molded from an innocent child into a monster like Johan. However, this isn't true. This isn't the full story. It's the second part of the quote that completes the truth. The part of the quote that states that Johan and Anna are precious jewels, that their lives do have value, that Johan and Anna don't have to become monsters. The truth that despite their past, despite the disadvantages of their upbringing, despite their traumatic childhood, despite the loneliness, the emptiness, all the horrors that they have endured and will endure together, that even though it may feel as though they are the only two people on this earth, they don't have to be a product of their genetics or their environment, that they can still be anything they want to be, that they can still be happy, that they can still live lives full of meaning, that they can still love and be loved. That you can be anything you want to be, and you can even be a good person like Tenma. And in the end, we don't truly know what happened to Johan after he heard his name and realized that he was wrong about humans. Perhaps Monster is deliberately left open-ended in this way, because life is left open-ended. People can become anything they want to be, just as the ending is anything you want it to be.